The proceeding will start shortly.
So 5-4. Good morning and welcome to the EU Security and Justice Committee of the House of Lords. We are continuing today our inquiry into post-Brexit law enforcement cooperation. I'm delighted to say we're joined today by three witnesses who have current or former experience at very senior levels in the law enforcement community. Vice Admiral Sir Charles Montgomery, who was Director General of the UK Border Force until 2017. Steve Rodhouse, who is Director General Operations at the National Crime Agency, and Assistant Chief Constable Peter Ayling, who is the National Police Chiefs Council lead for Brexit and international criminality. This is a public meeting, it's being broadcast and transcribed, and we will make sure witnesses are sent a copy of the transcript for correction before publication. And I should just recognise at the outset that, Sir Charles, you don't have current operational experience as the other two witnesses do, but we will very much value your perspective and the basis of your long experience leading the border force. And do feel free to come in whenever you would like to. The aim of our inquiry is to assess how the terms of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the EU is going to affect law enforcement cooperation. Clearly, this deal is better than no deal, but we're very interested to analyse what its strengths and its weaknesses are, where there are gaps in capability that will need to be filled in the months and years ahead. So we'll have a range of questions from members probing those issues. But to get us started, I wonder whether each of you could give me a brief overall assessment of the deal and the main strengths and weaknesses in it as it strikes you now. And I wonder perhaps if I could start with Mr. Rodhouse, since you are longest in the role, and then come to Assistant Chief Constable Ayling and Sir Charles. Steve, if I may.
You may. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. So the role of the National Crime Agency is to lead the UK's fight to cut serious and organised crime, and that is inherently a transnational venture. When I look at the work of the National Crime Agency, pretty much every investigation or piece of work we undertake involves either people or money or data or some sort of criminal commodity moving across international boundaries. So it is absolutely crucial to our work that we can mobilise operational activity abroad and share data with our European partners. And I think looking at this deal, this does that. It is, we think, a good deal in terms of being able to maintain the tools and the tactics that we have enjoyed whilst members of the EU. So it does largely replicate the tools and powers that we've had. I'm sure we'll go on to talk in more detail around areas such as extradition and the role of Europol, and passenger name records, mutual legal assistance, and the like. But in reality, most of the pre-existing capabilities and tools will exist now we're at the end of the transition period. I'm sure we'll also go on to perhaps talk about the Schengen Information System, which is a system we won't have access to. We don't have access to any longer, and there has been much conversation around that. I've been very clear in all my conversations around this topic that from an NCA, and I don't want to speak for Peter, but I suspect NPCC as well, we would have wanted to retain the capability of the Schengen Information System, but the EU were clear there was no legal basis for that to happen. So we don't have that, and we will be working now on alternative mechanisms, predominantly the Interpol I-24/7 system, to share data. We've looked at this, and I'm sure we'll go into more detail, but our assessment actually is there is not a significant loss of capability, but there are some risks. So, as I say, I'm sure we go into more detail, but we are, as we've said before, reliant on both the UK, but probably more significantly, EU member states making use of that system, both to circulate data that will be useful to us within the UK to protect the public, but also to make our data alerts available on the front line to their law enforcement officers in the same way that Schengen Information System data was. But that's detail. In broad brush, I'd like to say that we do think this does represent a good deal on security, and we're grateful for the efforts that have gone into securing many of the capabilities that keep us safe.
Thank you very much indeed. Assistant Chief Constable Ayling, Peter.
Thank you very much. I think important not to go over all of the same points that Steve has been through, but I would just make a few supplementary points. Our assessment is also that this is a good deal, but the key issue for us is that we are 25 days in, and there is a need for us to work with our counterparts in EU member states in terms of the operationalising of a new agreement, because the legal framework is in place for us to exchange information. There has been the retention of many of the tools which are really important for us in carrying out our law enforcement duties, but the need for cooperation and for us to finesse domestic legislation and our policies and processes to ensure that that works effectively will be ongoing. And I think we can reasonably expect there will be a need for us to work together in that regard. This is something which we've been preparing for some time. My predecessor will have spoken at length about our preparations over 18 months. You will know that we have created the International Crime Coordination Centre. That was designed to build capability across UK policing, both in terms of training and providing clear policy and guidance. In December, the new National Extradition Unit came online, and so we are really well placed and well prepared for a negotiated deal. There's much to be very positive about, and I would make the same observation that whilst it was always a strong preference that we would retain access to the Schengen Information System, we are told that that was not legally possible, and therefore the contingencies have been put in place to rely on a system of Interpol notices with already high levels of confidence that that is being used effectively, both domestically and across European law enforcement. And it's important to remember that there remains a shared benefit in us being able to protect those who are vulnerable and carry out interventions for those that might cause harm. And again, high levels of confidence, 25 days in, that shared endeavour exists. But it would be naive to think that over the coming weeks and months, there won't be a need for us to adapt to a new legal framework.
Thank you very much. I think you make a key point that I'm sure members will want to come back to, that there are clearly some very important agreements in the text of this, but a lot will depend on how they're operationalised, how they actually translate into day-to-day, practical, effective cooperation between police forces. So I'm sure colleagues will want to come back to that. So Charles, from your perspective, how does this deal look?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that I don't know what the deal is. I'm not an insider. All I can rely on is what I read in the newspapers. And so actually, if you don't mind, it's probably better that I don't comment on the deal, lest I say something that is ill-informed. But what I would say is that I take an enormous amount of confidence, not on what I read in the media, but what Peter and Steve, from their perspectives of MPCC and NCA, say. That I just found very heartening. Just a couple of points that come through this to me. I mean, the first thing to say is that cooperation with the European Union when I was in Border Force relied on systems, on organisational links, and on personal relationships. And it's important, I think, that we don't get overly focused on the systems at the expense of the other two, which will be very important to sustain as well. In terms of systems, and we've talked a bit about the Schengen Information System, but you will have done some analysis, no doubt, of the flows of people and goods across the UK border, and you will have been, no doubt, struck by the sheer volume of stuff that comes in from the European Union, both people and goods. And it is a massive load on those at the border to do their very utmost to safeguard security at the border. That volume of people requires increasingly, I saw, very agile and responsive information systems if we're going to be able effectively to strip the illegal out from the perfectly normal legal, which is about 99% of what comes across the border, the legal bit. So it needs agility and it needs responsive systems. I remember well, because I was there at the time, when both at the political level and operational level, we put so much into getting hold of the Schengen information system. We already had ECRIS, for example, but PRUM was to follow. We put a huge amount of effort into that precisely for that reason. And the Schengen information system was core to our ability to strip out that illegal from the legal at the border. So we haven't talked about PRUM or ECRIS, and I'm not sure what the status of that will be in the post-Brexit agreement. But whatever it is that replaces the Schengen information system is going to weaken border security unless it retains that agility, responsiveness, and not to mention, of course, comprehensiveness of data that comes across the border. So at the moment, whilst I take the NCA and MPCC's assurances very seriously, I personally am wanting to hear more about the ability to sustain that agility and responsiveness through the systems.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think we will come to each of those issues in more detail over the next hour or so. But the first one we're going to turn to is extradition, and I would ask Lord Rowlands to pick up the questioning.
Yes, very grateful. Over the last few months, we've been receiving quite considerable evidence about serious concerns resulting from the decision to opt out of the European arrest warrant. If I may briefly summarise them, there was one, that the possibility the process would become politicised. It would become an executive rather than a judicial decision. And secondly, we were going to go back to the old clumsy, slow way of, in fact, trying to enforce warrants, which frequently led to individuals evading justice for a considerable period of time. The government's response has been that they were going to seek a Norway-Iceland arrangement. But am I right in thinking, from my reading of the agreement, that in fact both the serious concerns have been addressed, and indeed that the agreement itself goes beyond the agreement that exists between Norway and Iceland? I'd be grateful for the observations of our witnesses.
Would you, Mr. Rodhouse, perhaps like to start with that?
Yes, thank you. So absolutely, the ability to remove people from the country and indeed return people to the UK who need to face justice is really very, very important, and we were heavily engaged in making the operational case for what was required. You're right, the deal does include an arrangement that's based on the Norway-Iceland agreement. The thing from our point of view is that we are reassured over is that the new arrangements do retain the majority of the features from the European arrest warrant system. So importantly for us, there is an immediate power of arrest because we were most concerned about coming across individuals in a range of circumstances and not being able to take the action to secure them. And it does indeed include mandated time limits for surrender of individuals to countries. Now, I think Peter's point previously is absolutely right. We need to see how these systems work in practice. It's very early days. The replacement for an EAW, we're calling informally a TACA warrant. Now, we haven't received or issued any of those warrants yet, so we very much need to see how that system plays out. But it has got the component features that we need. Like everything, I want to be balanced on this. There are areas that are not quite the same as an EAW, and one of them, of course, is that EU member states have the option to declare a nationality bar and to effectively not extradite their own national. Now, we don't yet know which countries will make that formal declaration. I anticipate there will be some, but it wouldn't be appropriate to go into who those countries are or are likely to be. But none have made an official declaration as yet. Now, of course, that's not a complete bar to proceedings, and there are potential arrangements for an alternative path to justice, whereby either someone could face trial in the UK and then maybe return to their country to complete their sentence, or in some cases, it could be possible to transfer proceedings to another country. But it'd be wrong to not draw that out as a feature of the new system. I hope that's helpful. Yes.
Would you confirm that what has been maintained is that it's a judicial process rather than an executive decision?
Yes, in the same way of the EAW, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very important, I think.
Does Peter Ayling want to add to that, perhaps?
Only very briefly. Our view is much the same. The arrangement is a streamlined version of the Norway-Iceland arrangement. It allows for direct transmission with limited grounds for refusal and a time-limited process. Those were the key aspects for us to ensure the workability of it. The key aspect for us, I mean, this is something that with the National Extradition Unit we are looking at closely to ensure effectiveness of. I think a perfect storm of being 25 days in as EU member states consider their own approach to a new agreement, and COVID restrictions means it's very difficult to draw any meaningful comparisons. But all of the components are there to say that what we have is an effective means to remove people from the country and to proceed upon extradition requirements.
That's very reassuring, actually. Yes, thank you.
Lord Arbuthnot.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. We are 25 days in now. The relationship between the European arrest warrant and the Schengen Information System 2 was flagged up by the National Police Chiefs Council as being very important. What do you think the future of this is in terms of UK law enforcement for the replacement on the extradition arrangements? Are you able to give an estimate of how many new cases would have been started in a typical week under the European arrest warrant, and how many new cases per week are started, well, since the 1st of January? This is really for Assistant Chief Constable Ayling.
Yes. So I'll try and cover off a few things in the round. In relation to SIS2, some general points, I suppose, to start off. We have always said that our preference would be to retain it, and a fallback to Interpol notices and diffusions was likely to be a slower, more clunky process. I think that's how it's previously been described. What's important is visibility of notices and the ability for us to act upon that information. And we're confident the new arrangement puts that in place. It does depend on the Interpol notices being in place. But at this stage, we are confident in the use of that system. So by way of example, rather than give specific stats, I can say that currently there are over 8,000 notices that have been entered onto SIS2. This doesn't just pertain to extradition. This is in total, where that compares to just over a couple of hundred a few years ago. So there's much greater use of the Interpol system to use and transfer that information. And that's reciprocal. We're seeing that on both sides of the border. It might well be that Steve has more stats. I wouldn't like to comment. So we've got a system that is workable now. Now, there is work ongoing and in the future to try to design concepts that might improve that visibility and access further. Now, that's what we are closely engaged with the Home Office on under the International Law Enforcement Alert Platform, ILEAP programme. It's very early stages, difficult to comment, but that would be about increasing the functionality of the Interpol system of notices to make it more ready and accessible for UK policing. So there is work in place that would hope to optimise that arrangement. In terms of the last aspect on what will we expect through throughput, I don't have specific comparisons to draw now. What I can say with a high level of confidence is activity since the 1st of January is below what we would have seen in a comparable period last year. But I'll come back to two important elements. The first is we are 25 days in. Many of the EU member states have not yet adapted their own processes and framework to take into account of this arrangement. So I think there is a key period in February where those will be formally put in place. And COVID restrictions means there is a lot less movement, a lot less activity. So it's very, very difficult to carry out a meaningful comparison. But the issue you raise is an important one, and you can expect, working with the NCA and the ICCC, it's something we will have very close regard to. And I hope in the coming months we'll be able to extrapolate the information and then draw a meaningful comparison to determine effectiveness and where we might need to finesse the approach further.
Thank you very much.
I remember that one of our previous witnesses said that the Interpol system is not connected to the police national computer. Now, I'm a layman, complete layman in these terms, but is that what you're really addressing there, Peter? The idea that connectivity and visibility needs to be improved so that the system works more quickly across different databases?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, we have a workaround at the moment where Interpol notices will appear as a marker on PNC and then can be accessed via that route. But it's the ability to draw those together to make the information more readily available. It currently relies on a manual process, one which we have confidence in, but requires additional labour to ensure dual circulation.
Indeed. So Charles, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just from a border perspective, and again, my experience goes back 3 years, but the connectivity between sharing information system and the warnings index, and it's the warnings index which is key to controls at the border. SIS2 to warnings index was pretty well seamless. The Interpol to warnings index was pretty much a manual process. We were working to make a more automated process, but it was slower, it was more clunky. So I think it's important to keep an eye not simply on the linkage between Interpol and the police national computer, but also but how that information is translated to the warnings index. You know, I come back to this point about agility and responsiveness. Of course, you were ambassador in Paris at the time of the terrorist attacks, and we remember well the speed with which we had to intervene at the border and put systems in place. Then, I SIS2 enable that. Interpol at the time would not have done.
Thank you very much, Baroness Gowdy.
Morning, gentlemen. Following on from my two colleagues, we've heard a lot about the renewed commitment to the 24/7 database as a replacement for SIS2. Is the Interpol database likely to be set as a factory substitute? And further, all of these programs and databases are only as good as the person putting the input in. And what guarantee have we got about how that inputting is going to be, and what's the time frame from that, regardless of the COVID situation, because of the question of terrorism and other issues that are we hope won't happen, but there's likelihood as well.
Rodhouse, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Absolutely. Good morning. So, I mean, this issue around the comparison in functionality between SIS2 and I-24/7 is something that's occupied a lot of our thought. I mean, in terms of SIS2, at its simplest, it's a system that allows operational officers, when they're undergoing checks in a range of circumstances, through the police national computer, if they're in the UK, to course of doing that, and they will be unwittingly doing it in some occasions, they will be checking through alerts on the SIS2 system as well. And it gives them that access to information in operational scenarios on the street. Now, the challenge for us is to make sure that officers, through using that gateway through the PNC, still have access to that data that is available to us, albeit it will be via the I-24/7 Interpol system. Now, the route for making that jump between I-24/7 and frontline officers is typically through the UK's International Criminality Bureau that we operate here at the NCA. And just picking up a point that's been made, just want to be clear, when I-24/7 or Interpol notice alerts arrive in the UK, we have now a process to put them onto the police national computer in very fast time. So we are talking a number of hours, but we're not talking a number of days. And to Sir Charles' point around the warnings index, that is a similar process is in place, although I understand it is and I will write to you, Chair, if this is not correct, but I believe it to be a 24-hour upload. So there is a degree of a delay there. But it's still quite swift. So we're quite confident in that process. It's right to say that we have recruited staff within the NCA to undertake that. So that's the process. In terms of the scale of the data that's available to us, we've obviously looked into this. So in terms of wanted people across Europe, we in the UK lost access to 40,000 alerts on people who were wanted, where generally there will be an arrest warrant in place for them. But through the Interpol I-24/7 system, we now have access to 40,000 in round numbers Interpol alerts. And we think there is a huge overlap, very significant overlap. So we don't believe there's a significant loss of data or capability in that respect between the two systems. And we think that's important. From a UK perspective, as Peter has said, we made sure that data that was available on the SIS2 system relating to UK alerts was drawn out and replicated on I-24/7. So there are 8,410 alerts at the last count that were dual circulated, so are now available on Interpol. And we also undertook a process of asking EU member states to recirculate European arrest warrants in the form of Interpol notices. And we are seeing an increase in, I don't have data other than to say we are seeing an increase in Interpol notices from EU member states. So we are confident at the moment there isn't a significant gap either in timeliness or data in that respect. But there are some caveats. And one is we need EU member states to continue to do this. So rather than just circulate via SIS2, we want them to take out Interpol notices as well. And clearly there'll be some judgments they'll make as to whether or not they think that is the right thing to do in the particular case. Equally, one of the benefits of SIS2, certainly in the UK, and I'm led to believe in Europe as well, is, as I've said, it's data that's available to frontline officers undertaking checks. Now, I don't believe that is commonly the place in every EU member state. So there'll be some systems that we want EU partners to put in place so that their officers are going to have on the street access to data that the UK has put into the system. So there are some caveats there, but I wouldn't want to overstate now the capability gap because of this change. Interpol is a system that we use, of course, with the rest of the world. We're well practiced in doing that, and we have systems and skilled people right across law enforcement very used to this. And the final point I'll make is that Peter and his team in MPCC have set up the International Criminality Coordination Centre. And that was in part designed to make sure that our law enforcement people understood these changes and were well practiced and able to put them in place. So they have a system and a network of people across the country ensuring that our operational officers know how to use these alternative systems. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Do either of the other two witnesses want to add to that? That's, if I may say, it's extremely useful to our report to have that level of detail and specificity to to illustrate for us the issues that you're grappling with.
Nothing more from me, Chair.
Peter.
Perhaps just for me to reiterate the importance of what Steve mentioned, that over the last 18 months, an important role of the ICCC is to build that capability and the understanding that, where previously if somebody went missing and there was a risk of international travel, it would be automatically populated onto SIS2. There now has to be a conscious decision to circulate that in a different way. But we are confident with the notices that have gone on and the metrics that Steve has alluded to, that now has been well embedded across UK policing and is also being reciprocated for EU member states, but something for us to continue to monitor going forward.
Thank you very much. Can we move then to Europol and Eurojust and Lord Kirkhope?
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Can I just look at Europol with you? Because, of course, we moved from a situation where we were effectively running Europol. We had the leadership of Europol, and indeed we used Europol very extensively. Now we're in a situation as a third country, the rules are quite clear on that we cannot be part of the decision-making at the highest level on the board, but we are going to be able to have liaison officers in place, very similar to the situation, as I understand it, with the United States, which also has persons present in the headquarters and aware of what is going on. And what I'm really interested in is the practical side of this. Have we committed already the necessary personnel and in the right categories to get best advantage out of our new relationship with Europol? And although you have already spoken about Interpol and the ability we may have now in future to utilize those arrangements, I want to know whether or not you think Europol is going to be as useful to us in future as it has been in the past, or where we're actually going to be operating to benefit from it. And can I perhaps ask Mr. Rodhouse to start that, and followed by Assistant Chief Constable Ayling?
Thank you, absolutely. So the relationship with Europol is a very, very important one. It has been so and will continue to be so. When I look across the serious and organised crime threats that we face, a large number of them, if not all, feature, as I say, either people, data, money, commodities travelling through Europe to the UK. And so it is really important for us to be able to engage at scale in a multilateral venture such as Europol. So I think you're right to draw out the strategic and the tactical when it comes to our future relationship with Europol. On a practical level, very little will change with our relationship with Europol. We will still have the UK Liaison Bureau. We have not withdrawn people from there. We continue to have the right people in place who have got very strong relationships, and we're seen as an active participant there. Since, and Peter's right to flag only 25 days in, but we've seen no deterioration in terms of the volume, speed, or kind of quantity or quality of intelligence that we share through Europol. We continue to be able to do that. So that's a really strong picture for us. You are right to say that we have had a leading role in the management of Europol in the past, and that's going to look slightly different. So we're not able to be part of the Europol management board in the future, and potentially one might say that might reduce our influence on where Europol places its focus and on what particular threats. I like to believe that the size and the history and the quality of our people there, and frankly the interests of all European partners to work with the UK, will mean that our voice will still be heard, although perhaps in slightly less formal settings. And we are and will remain a very strong participant within Europol because there's mutual benefit in doing that. And so I am confident about the future. We will continue from an NCA, because we host the Bureau over there. We will continue to invest high quality people, sharing information in the way in which we are able to, and there's no barrier to that, and working hard with Europol, because it's in our interest and in Europe's interest to continue to do so.
And Mr. Ayling.
I can't add very much more to the comprehensive response that Steve has given. For UK policing, I don't anticipate the arrangement will result in any diminution of our activity, our efforts for law enforcement across borders.
Can I just go back to you, Mr. Rodhouse, for a moment, please, on the relationship between Europol and Eurojust? Because, of course, we were signed up not only to Europol, but also to the relationship with Eurojust. I'm guessing now that we will not be in that direct relationship any longer. I'm assuming that's the case, but perhaps you could clarify that.
Probably not able to clarify it in quite as much detail as you'd like, if I'm honest. So it really would be for the Crown Prosecution Centre Service and the Home Office to talk about Eurojust. My understanding is, and from work that we continue to do in the agency, is that our engagement with Eurojust remains strong, and I believe we still have a presence there undertaking the work. But I'm not well placed to talk about the legislative basis on which we do that, I'm afraid.
No, it's just that Europol, of course, is the basis upon how Eurojust works and the direct reference between the two. And presumably, therefore, that line will not be open to us anymore, even if we find an alternative approach.
As I say, I'm probably not best placed to talk about that. I'm sorry, I don't wish to be difficult, but I wouldn't want to mislead you either.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we then move on to other aspects of operational cooperation, and Lord Anderson of Ipswich?
Thank you. You have suggested that the replacement for SIS-2 will be reliance on Interpol notices and diffusions, and you've spoken about attempts to make Interpol data more accessible to UK policing. But the agreement with the EU also includes Title 4, which provides for cooperation on operational information to the extent that this is not provided for in other titles of the treaty. So it doesn't cover PRUM, PNR, ECRIS, and so on. But there is specific reference in that article to information on wanted and missing persons and objects, which seems to have a SIS-2 sort of flavour. How useful do you believe UK law enforcement will find the provisions in Title 4 on cooperation on operational information? And can you give us practical examples of when they might be used?
Would it be... I'm happy to start off, Steve, and then maybe I'll come to you for any additional information. So, as you rightly say, Title 4 puts in place a legal framework for the exchange of information, and this is something when we refer to the likely loss of SIS-2, it is both the actual exchange of that information, how accessible, but also the legal means to do so. So this is a really important provision that still enables us to exchange information and intelligence with European law enforcement agencies, many of whom domestic law arrangements are such that there needs to be a sort of prescribed mechanism, means, framework to do so. So it is important that gives the means to do so quickly and without recourse through other sort of judicial channels. So most commonly that we would manage that through Europol and through the foreign law enforcement community, and is something that we have frequently made good use of and will continue to do so. In terms of practical examples, I mean, there are a host already since the 1st of January. In looking through the work, in going through this transition, I'm aware of one certainly where information was passed to us for Romania regarding a vulnerable female who was subject to domestic abuse. We were able to receive and use that information in order to put safeguarding arrangements in place. And that ultimately resulted in an offender being arrested in the UK. There are a number of other examples where there is continued effective use of police-to-police information for the use of safeguarding and to ensure that we can still continue a focus on disrupting, intervening those that would cause harm.
Steve, anything to add to that?
Not a great deal. I think in the National Crime Agency, we're in a slightly different legislative position in as much as we actually would rely largely on the Crime and Court Acts in any case to bilaterally share information with EU member states. So our assessment is that we wouldn't be heavily relying on Title IV in any case, but I don't disagree with anything that Peter has said there.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Steve, if I could just ask for a little more detail on a previous answer that you gave in relation to SIS2 and Europol and how far it's an effective substitute. You said, I think, that we lost data on 30,000 persons on whom alerts were out, but we now have 40,000 Interpol alerts, and we believe that there is a very high overlap. Does that mean that we've recovered through Interpol data on most of, or in a sense, most of the data that we lost on those 30,000 persons? And then secondly, you said that you'd asked EU member states to recirculate arrest warrants as Interpol notices, and we're seeing an increase. Does that mean that all member states are currently recirculating all arrest warrants? And if not, what is the shortfall?
Thank you. So I may have misspoke or not been clear earlier. So the figure in both cases in terms of the number of alerts we lost and the number of wanted alerts on I-24/7 is around 40,000 in both cases. So it's not that one was 30 and one was 40,000. So I think there is an almost direct comparison between the two numbers there. So apologies if that wasn't clear. In terms of encouraging EU member states to take out Interpol notices for cases where they had not previously done so, I don't have numbers to hand, I'm afraid, Lord Anderson. I just know that certainly we have seen a spike in Interpol notices in recent weeks, and a couple of particular countries who have done so, Belgium and Italy being a particular case. It just shows that our messaging, and we've been very clear with all our international liaison officers about the importance of this and have been for some time. It seems to be that there is a very strong overlap and not a big data loss in terms of our access to alerts data.
And Peter, a last one for you, if I may. Martin Hewitt, as chair of the NPCC, came to Parliament in November, as we're reminded in the Financial Times today, and said that the loss of SIS2 would have a major operational impact. The consensus, I think, between both of you today is that we are not looking at a significant loss of capability. What has changed between November and now that has made the position apparently rosier than it seemed then?
My broadband dropped out. I think that was referred to me as there was reference to Mr. Hewitt. Yeah. And the question being what changed from the original position. So
a letter he wrote in November, I think, to the Home Affairs Select Committee, referring to the loss of SIS2 as a significant loss of capability. But today we're hearing not a significant loss of capability. And I just wondered, what has changed between November and now?
So I think important to just reference, at the beginning I said there was a strong preference to retain access to SIS2, and the reality is it is a significant loss in capability in terms of the access of data which is automated and integrated within our systems. Nevertheless, there are contingencies that are in place. In November, what was difficult to foresee is how they would be used by EU member states. It relies on the level of cooperation, and also what the mechanisms would be that would allow for exchange of that information, which is an important additional element that was provided for within SIS2. So what we have through the deal is a legal framework that enables the exchange of that information. Now that is a really, really important aspect. That means that we have visibility and can act upon European arrest warrants, and as we've previously discussed, enables police-to-police information to be transferred. What we are seeing currently through the use of Interpol notices and diffusions is a good take-up across UK policing and also across EU member states that gives us a high level of confidence that contingency position is being well in place. But I still think, and it would not be for me to speak for Martin Hewitt, I think we would still say that arrangement falls a long way short of the benefits that were provided by SIS2. However, it's sufficient that enables us to effectively discharge our responsibilities. It delivers a mechanism where we can cooperate, and over the coming weeks, months, and no doubt years, there are opportunities for us to enhance that further and to rebuild some of the capability that might have been lost through SIS.
So Charles mentioned the aftermath of the terrorist attacks in Paris as an occasion when real-time access was absolutely vital. Is that the sort of situation in which you think we might see an operational impact were we all to be so unfortunate as to see those events repeated?
So I think it's fair to say that there are additional safeguards that are, I don't profess to be expert, but exist within the world of CT and the CT network that would enable immediate transfer of information where there was a compelling need to do so. So I can't talk from a particularly informed position, I'm afraid. I'd be happy to write to the committee and provide clarity on that issue. But I know there are specific arrangements that exist for CT that can be accessed through our CT network.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'd appreciate that. I think Lord Anderson of Swansea, who's joining us on the telephone, also wanted to follow up on this issue of urgent cases. Lord Anderson.
Lord Chairman, before I continue on the cooperation on information operations, can I go back, with your leave, to extradition and the possible differences between Europol and Interpol? Now, Europol is a very different sort of animal. It is a group of countries which largely rely on the rule of law, whereas Interpol is a different sort of animal with many countries which do not. And there has been a number of examples of abuse of the Interpol system, the Red Notice system, particularly by Russia. I think of Bill Browder's book on Red Notice. Have there been examples of abuse in Europol? And how significant is the abuse of the Interpol system by countries like Russia?
So I think that's probably one best for me to pick up, Lord Anderson. It's Steve Rodhouse here from the agency. So effectively what we're talking about here is use of the I-24/7 system to circulate the existence of a notice, of an Interpol notice. What the deal doesn't do is change the various safeguards that are in place to make sure that there is a judicial and legal basis and some veracity to the allegation that is being made. It doesn't change the fact that the UK's National Bureau for Interpol, which is hosted by the National Crime Agency in Warrington, will continue to ensure that there are safeguards in place before Interpol notices are taken out. It's quite difficult to put a number on the sort of the number of cases or proportion of cases where there are concerns, and in fact it's a very small number, and I'm not prepared, I'm not able in this meeting or probably at this classification to talk about those, but suffice to say they will remain safeguards in place so that the Interpol notice system is not abused.
Thank you very much. That's reassuring. Can I now turn to my question under the broad heading of cooperation on operational information? Title 5 reads as follows. In urgent cases, the providing competent authority shall respond to a request or provide information spontaneously as soon as possible. May I have your views on this provision?
So I'll get with that briefly, if I may, being Steve Rodhouse here. As I said earlier, from the NCA's perspective, we don't anticipate relying on Title 4 in any case because there are alternative powers under the Crime and Court Act for bilateral sharing of information. It seems to me, from a layperson's perspective, quite tricky to talk about as soon as possible and put particular safeguards around that, because there'll be a variety of different factors in place. But certainly from a National Crime Agency perspective, we will always endeavour to share important information as quickly as possible. So I don't see that this undermines Title IV. It's just, the operational reality is such that we will always try and share important information, subject to safeguards around information sharing, of course, as swiftly as possible, so it can be used to the best effect. I don't know if Peter's got anything he would want to say on that.
I'll just come in briefly if I can. Much the same provision. I wouldn't say that there was anything undermining within that description, or that particularly enhances it. I referred earlier to the need for there to be a sort of common understanding and shared endeavour to protect those that are vulnerable, to prosecute those that are criminal, and I think this just gives a hint at the need for there continue to be goodwill on both sides. But there is nothing in there that I think offers us opportunity or gives me cause for concern.
Is it fair to summarise by saying this is just good practice and it doesn't add anything to the provisions?
Yes, I mean, I think that would be fair. It represents that there is a common benefit, mutual benefit for us being able to cooperate in that way, and to do so in the quickest possible time frame where there is an urgent need. And there's every indication that will continue to be the case.
Therefore, OTOs.
Not getting a reaction to that, I think, Lord Anderson.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I wonder to Charles, anything you'd like to add on the conversation on these issues?
Not on that, Chair, but thank you for coming back to me, because I just want to make clear my point about the terrorist attacks when we were both in post, you in Paris and myself in Border Force. But my point there was about an example of an instance where rapid exchange of information was important. There are indeed separate systems which connect counter-terrorism organisations around Europe, and indeed the intelligence agency concerned has the ability to upload directly onto Warnings Index. So it was a point about rapid exchange of information rather than about that particular incident. But I could quote any number of other instances of both security and criminality where rapid and agile exchange of information was important. That was the first point. The second point, which we've only just touched on, which was related to that, and just want to highlight the importance to border policing of advanced passenger information and passenger name records. It's the flip side of that data matching coin. Those became comprehensive and very agile and very responsive too, and I would hope that they will continue to be so. It was important. It was important when I was in post because, of course, responsive changes to the Warnings Index had to be matched by also rapid exchange of information on who was travelling to and from the United Kingdom. So PNR and API were, of almost equal importance to anything on SIS2.
Indeed. I don't know whether Lord Kirkhope, who was the author of a lot of the legislation on PNR, had any particular point on that you wanted to raise at this point.
Lord Chairman, thank you very much. Can I just, on PNR, for which I have the dubious honour of being responsible, I just would like to know, we're getting mixed messages here about the question of accessing information. In a way, depending on how you read the agreements that the government have achieved, it is either going to continue to be real time, which of course is the critical element of it, and I mean real time rather than 24 hours or, as a result of pieces of paper passing, or it's going to be as soon as possible, or it's going to be something like that. I mean, I just wondered whether anyone has any comments on this whole issue as to whether or not they interpret the agreement as being still maintaining what essentially is the real-time exchange, the instant exchange of information, which of course is the key to the success of PNR. I don't know whether Sir Charles would perhaps comment first, and the others perhaps.
I can't comment on what's in the current agreements. No, that's not. That's, I'm afraid, beyond my expertise. I've really nothing more to say about the importance of PNR and its immediacy. And of course, just to make a point, of course, PNR and API are exchanged at various points, but including in advance of the travel. So it enables you to take preemptive action rather than entirely reactive. So I have nothing to add about the new arrangements. But just
Mr. Rodhouse, could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our reading and understanding of this is that we will continue to be able to exchange passenger name records. And indeed, I am briefed that actually it builds upon previous capabilities in as much as there'll be more frequent pushes of data by the airlines. So which indicates to me that actually we certainly don't anticipate a reduction in that very, very important capability. I completely understand and agree with Sir Charles about the importance of it. So I understand that Border Force are going to have to make some technical changes to the system, but that over the most important thing is that it won't have an important negative impact on the capabilities. So I'm briefed to be confident on this, Lord Kirkhope.
Thank you very much.
Very good. I'm glad you are, Mr. Rodhouse. Thank you. Our last set of questions, and I'll try not to spend too much more time, is on data sharing. And I've turned first to Baroness Primarolo.
Good morning. If perhaps we could build on the answers that you gave on PNR just now about access to data. The TCA provides access to data for DNA, fingerprints, vehicle information, PNR, operational information, as well as Europol, Eurojust, and criminal records. And this is all real-time information. And like Lord Kirkhope, I'm not exactly clear. We're being told, not just today, but over different inquiries, two different answers. One is our operational, or as Sir Charles calls it, comprehensive responsiveness and agility is maintained, but in a different way. And then on the other side, we're being told, well, we will get it, but probably not quite as fast. Now, these databases are crucial for real-time information. So could you outline to us, and I'll start first with Steve, how are we faring here in the access to these crucially important real-time databases? Is it protected for us?
Thank you. I think the short answer is yes, actually, and I'll be very clear if I didn't think that was the case, because you know, a long time in law enforcement, you're absolutely right to highlight the importance of real-time information, or information as quickly as is reasonable, and the breadth of information. So the areas that you outlined there, you know, DNA and fingerprints is catered for by the PRUM system of exchange, which is something that I was involved in pushing forward from a law enforcement perspective, because I see the benefit of it. This deal continues our access to the PRUM system. And, you know, actually, I think it makes the UK safer, because it will allow us to make more links between people and crime scenes that we wouldn't otherwise have seen. And of course, we've said just how many people travel. So of course, it's phenomenally important. But what we have going forward is a continuation of what we are already building. So I'm confident there. There's no reduction in capability. It's the same. The same when it comes to the exchange of criminal records. And I can't overstate the importance of understanding the criminal history of somebody when courts are making decisions, investigators are understanding the background of someone. It's phenomenally important. So I was very vocal in saying about the importance of maintaining access to the ECRIS capability of international convictions data. And what this deal gives us is a continuation of that access. Now, the ACRO body leads on this, they are the experts, but my understanding is we don't expect any reduction in the timescales by which we share and obtain data from the EU. The average time is 6 days, and we understand that's not likely to change. And of course, as Peter has said, we're 25 days in, so we will see. We will retain that capability. I understand there'll be a change of name, but in reality, we will still have access to that information. And the same, as I've said, with passenger name records, really important capability. We're not expecting any reduction. Indeed, in PNR, as I say, I'm told that there will be more frequent technical pushes of data from airlines that can only improve the speed and accuracy of the data. So that is all positive. And we were very clear before that the deal was struck that if we didn't get that, that would be very difficult for the UK. So I am pleased with what we've seen. We are still investing to make sure that we can make the best use of that information. So going back to the material we get through the Interpol route and the speed with which we can place it onto the data systems and radios of our officers out on the street, we're investing in robotic process automation to make sure that's done very quickly and efficiently. And we're really pleased with the way that's going. It allows us to effectively and efficiently make sure that data is available within the UK within a small number of hours. It's not real time, but it is swift. So I think there are reasons to be positive here, if I may say so.
Thank you. Peter, could I ask you, I mean, this question of real-time access is really important, and maintaining the access we had. So do you share that confidence as well, that basically nothing's changed?
Yes, I do. There were 3 key areas that we've discussed. Regarding the exchange of information related to DNA and fingerprints, there's little material difference in how we will use the system access and its benefit for UK policing. PNR data has been talked about. Again, my reading is there is little practical change in how we can access and use that information. And in fact, there may be future opportunities with a slight readjustment of the thresholds to be able to extend the use, and particularly how we use it in matters of safeguarding. We just touched on ECRIS, so access to the criminal records information from abroad. Steve is right, the technical architecture has remained, so it is pretty much the same functionality, is now referred to as UK CRIS. Although the timescales prescribed for that have changed slightly, I mean, I've seen that referred to as real time. The arrangement was always that exchange would take place expeditiously and in any case within 10 days. I understand that has now varied to 20 days, but as Steve rightly says, all of the indications we've got currently is that there is no drop in that cooperation, and the timescales are pretty much the same as they were before the 1st of January. So on these areas, I'm confident that the deal is an effective one, and optimistic that the functionality that we had previously that was so important to our law enforcement efforts continues under the new deal.
Thank you. I just, sorry to labour this point, but I want to be absolutely clear here in terms of access to those crucial databases and exchange of information. Your assessment is that UK law enforcement has not lost anything significant in comparing the TCA arrangements with the arrangements when we were still in the transition before the TCA. Would that be right, as long as we get access to data?
From the National Crime Agency?
So not quite. There is. Sorry. So just on that. So in terms of SIS2, we'd have to recognise that there is a drop in capability. But I don't want to lay that point. We've talked about it. In terms of the other systems, with exchange of criminal records and PNR, yes, very confident that the same functionality that existed previously is under the new arrangements.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Just perhaps passing to the next speaker, Lord Anderson of Swansea, you might just mute your telephone just so that we avoid that. Thank you very much. We come to Baroness Hamwee.
Thank you, Chair. Peter's bandwidth is showing as low, but I won't read across from that to the content of the answers and whether the bandwidth of the systems is reducing. I was going to ask about ECRIS or EUCRIS now, just to pursue the points which have already been explored, particularly as Steve was saying that one can't overstate the importance of this. Yes, the agreement says as soon as possible for the sharing of information in any event within 20 days, which in normal speak, of course, is 1 month. And criminals don't stop over the weekend. I don't suppose you do either. The assurances about the average time being unlikely to change, are you able to share where this information and where these assurances come from? I think it was Steve who said that.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, that assessment is made by ACRO. ACRO is the body that works and leads on ECRIS and data exchange, and that's their assessment. And of course, as Peter has said, I think it is largely based on the fact that the infrastructure and the people involved, the technical architecture, won't change. So that's the basis of this. I mean, it is right to say it's early days and we will see, but certainly the information that I have is that since the end of the transition period, there has been no slowing of information reported through this mechanism. So the UK hasn't lost anything, it's not become slower. Yes, six days is the average turnaround time for that data. It's not live time. And that's because actually there's a degree of inconsistency, or there are different offences in different countries that need to be aligned and interpreted. And that's the reason for this. I know ACRO will continue to work tirelessly to speed that up so that information can be received. But it's never been the case that you could do a check on an overseas national on the street and understand then and there what their conviction history was in another country. That's never been the case. But what ACRO and ECRIS does give us is a timely way, certainly in terms of European countries, to access data that allows good decision making on protecting the public. Now, whether that be about pursuing investigations and understanding someone's history and previous modus operandi, or allowing courts to make decisions on bail or suitable sentencing, that's really where this information is very, very important. So I am delighted that, in essence, we have maintained the same capability.
Can I ask whether you think that this may change over time, because we won't be in there in the same way, we'll just be a third country when systems change. And of course, the way data is dealt with, the technology changes pretty rapidly. Are there potential weaknesses ahead in that?
So I think I would be only speculating if I was to answer that in detail, and I really wouldn't want to mislead anyone, because as I say, ACRO are the technical leads and they will know about the technical infrastructure that you refer to. I just make the point that actually this is a two-way exchange of data. So it is within the interests of the rest of the participants in the current ECRIS system to be able to access UK data.
Yeah, no, I get that. Peter, do you want to come in on that? Or perhaps actually before you do, because you might want to combine them. You talked about different system, but a manual process to connect Interpol and the Police National Computer. And then Steve talked about investing in robotic systems. I don't know if we're talking about the same things. Steve's nodding, but any comments you have around the questions I've just been asking about the future?
So in terms of the future as it pertains to eCRIS, which is now being termed UK CRIS, I don't have concerns. It's difficult to look too far ahead in the future, but all of the indications are that the system is resilient. It will continue to mirror that was in place previously. And we were a key contributor, one of the most significant contributors to the database. And that's where there is the mutual benefit in sort of reciprocal arrangements for us and other EU member states. So confident in that regard. In terms of the future of automation, use of robotics in Interpol notices, yes, we are talking about the same thing. Now, this is at very early stages. It is conceptual, but the ability for us to exchange information on a bilateral basis represents an opportunity to do something differently about the input and accessibility of data and how we might exploit technology in the future. But it's at such an early stage, I couldn't comment on timescales or viability, only to say that those opportunities are being looked at so that we can optimize a process that currently requires a level of additional manual input and dual circulation.
This all sounds very resource intensive. And I've been wondering, as we've been talking, because I entirely take the point about it being two-way, that we aren't only dealing with the EU, we're dealing with the whole world. So I haven't had a sense, because this is our fault, we've been focusing on relations with the EU, whether we're having to change anything, and particularly, I suppose, learn anything working with other third country states. Is anybody able to give me a sense of how all this fits in with global relations?
So that's probably one for me to pick up. So you're right, we can't just focus on Europe. Organised crime, particularly transnational enterprise, really worldwide. Our relationships and involvements with Interpol as the global policing organisation are phenomenally strong. We've got a number of senior UK individuals leading aspects of that organisation, and we continue to build our capabilities together. So the world is wider than Europol, but Europol is really important for the reasons I outlined earlier. A lot of the UK's threats do come through Europe. So it's right that we continue to participate strongly in Europol. It's right that we look at other multinational organisations to where we can build relationships and build capability and sort of strengthen states where there are threats that emanate. And it's really right that we continue to build and enhance our relationships with Interpol. And I think the UK is well placed. We have Steve Kavanagh is the Executive Director of Policing Services, effectively leading the operational aspect of Interpol. Steve is a former UK Chief Constable, senior law enforcement official, and it's great that the UK have got that degree of insight and influence in an important organisation such as Interpol.
So Interpol is the really important one rather than equivalents of the other systems we've been talking about then. I'm taking that from your answer, because I think probably the chair wants us to continue to keep going.
Thank you. I don't want to cut off an interesting line of questioning. Thank you very much, Sammy. Just before coming to our last question on data, I wondered whether, Sir Charles, I could ask you a kind of layman's question. Talking about the immediacy of systems and the fact that ECRIS is typically 6 days, under current conditions, although the agreement says it might be as long as 20 days under the new one. for a border force officer, when somebody presents in front of a border force officer, the system that the officer relies on for instant data is presumably SIS2, or has been at the moment. Is that right? I mean, obviously ECRIS isn't relevant to a border force officer if it's that kind of a delay. The primary system in your time was SIS2, I guess, was it?
No, the primary system was the warnings index.
Right.
But the warnings index itself is a distillation of data that have come from other sources, including the Police National Computer, including MI5 watch lists, well, other intelligence agencies watch lists. It is HMRC watch list. The warnings index is a composite of all those sources of data, which enables officers at the front line to take a comprehensive view of the various risks or none that an individual poses when they come across the border. The point about SIS2 was its connectivity to the warnings index, which Interpol certainly lacked. I know we were working on it, but it lacked. Of the systems we've talked about today and which have a particular European Union focus, the one that is most important to that element of border force operations is the Schengen Information System, SIS2. That's the most important one. ECRIS, no, not for border force. PRUM, no. All those were systems which helped other law enforcement agencies. And if we touched PRUM or ECRIS, it was only very much at arm's length from those other primary law enforcement bodies. Does that help?
Yes, understood. Thank you. That's very helpful to understand how the systems work together. Could I turn then for our last programmed question, as it were, to Lord Pollack?
Thank you, Lord Chairman. And if I may preface my remarks by suggesting that I think this has been an extremely refreshing and encouraging session. You see, none of us are practitioners. Our job is to scrutinise and ask questions. And I've jotted a few comments down on a piece of paper here during this debate, during this discussion. Confident about the future, little material difference, retain our capabilities, no reductions in capabilities. On a practical level, little will change with Europol. So I'm going to go away from here thinking that actually things are not as bad as people had suggested. And actually what I'm really going away with to suggest that we are sort of blessed with professionals and practitioners like people we're speaking to today who are determined and are keeping us safe. But my question, I guess, having said that, is what is the fallback position if, perchance, the Commission does not grant the UK a data adequacy decision? And I don't mind who wants to answer.
I'll have a go. I don't wish to step in front of anyone. So clearly there are ongoing negotiations over the data adequacy agreement with the EU member states, but that is separate from the trade and cooperation agreement that we've been talking about here. So I don't want to prejudge those discussions, and neither do I have any insight either. But it is right to say that we can currently, under some bridging mechanisms, continue to exchange data with the UK, with the EU member states, without the need for any appropriate safeguards. And we'll continue to do that. So the challenge we will have is that if an adequacy agreement isn't agreed, we will be reliant on the EU member states applying their appropriate safeguard provisions, effectively a satisfaction that they will permit data transfers for the UK. And I'm pleased with what you've drawn from this session, and I agree with that assessment. I kind of reflect on the fact that if we hadn't had this agreement, then the situation would be rather difficult because the exchange of data is so important. So we would be dependent on the EU member states applying appropriate safeguards. Now, we will continue to facilitate, from an NCA perspective, we will continue to facilitate information sharing because we will share documentation with the EU member states to show that we've got appropriate safeguards in place. And that would show the levels of guidance and give reassurance to EU partners that we have those safeguards in place. And we've continued to offer those assurances and briefings through our international network of international liaison officers. So we've developed some appropriate safeguards assessments to show how we meet those standards, and we will continue to work alongside EU member states to give them the confidence to share that data. So that's the position as we see it, but I wouldn't want to prejudge the full data adequacy agreements. Clearly, that's the right thing for the UK to pursue, but we will be reliant on EU member states effectively agreeing our appropriate safeguard provisions.
Perhaps I'll just add briefly to that, and my apologies because I keep getting a warning sign about my bandwidth.
You might want to turn your camera off, Assistant Chief Constable. That will give you more bandwidth for the sound. Oh. I think we've temporarily got a connection problem to the Assistant Chief Constable. Lord Pollack, did you want to come back on Mr. Rodhouse's comment?
Oh, sorry, Chief Constable.
Sorry.
I can hear you.
You're very broken, Assistant Chief Constable. I don't know if by turning your camera off, you might find you've got more bandwidth. No. Right, I think, Lord Pollack, go back to...
I was just going to say that to Steve, I'm grateful. I hope and I'm sure that our report will reflect the positive views that we've heard today, that on a practical and professional level, things are not as bad as some people before, not necessarily around this committee, but others had suggested. I'm very encouraged, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we've had a very full exchange. If you can spare us another 5 minutes for a couple of colleagues who wanted to come back with supplementary questions. And I was going to set a bad example by doing one myself, which was just to ask first whether the arrangements on mutual legal assistance have any particular importance for the law enforcement community. That's another part of the trade and cooperation agreement. Do they affect law enforcement cooperation one way or the other? Are they seen as an improvement or an extension of what we have, or perhaps a weakening of what we have?
So in reality, it's an extension of what we had, and that's important because, as I've alluded to, so many of my investigations involve the exchange of information and often evidence and inquiries overseas. And the risk was that we would revert to previous powers under mutual legal assistance, and there were no timescales there. So it was possible that UK requests for information could have taken significantly longer. And of course, under the European information provisions, there were timescales, and effectively what we have now replicates that. So there's a continuation there, which I think is good news and important.
Right. Lord Arbuthnot, I think you wanted to come back on the Interpol database.
Yes, it was just a question arising out of what Sir Charles said about Interpol not having access to the warning index. And I wonder whether that might, you may not wish to answer this, Sir Charles, I don't know. I wonder whether that has anything to do with the fact that countries which are not naturally allied to the UK have access to information, and one wouldn't want to share with, for example, Russia, material from, for example, MI5. Is that the thinking behind it?
No, I mean, so no. To be clear, that my point about Interpol was no more profound than saying that it did not interface directly with Warnings Index, which meant that the information from Interpol had to be translated manually into the Warnings Index, and that is what takes the time. It is therefore a less responsive system. Different data sets than SIS2 as well. That's an aside, but it was a manual process. So my point was no more profound than that. And as I said, that certainly as I left Border Force, we were seeking to address that. So there could be a better translation, automatic translation between Interpol and the warnings index. But I can't answer whether that has been enacted. It doesn't sound as though it has.
But as Lord Rowlands was suggesting, the access to information in Interpol from countries like Russia must be an inhibition.
Well, not so. I may be misunderstanding the point, but all we would do is load what was required of us to load from Interpol Interpol alerts onto the warnings index. It would, of course, been for Russia to have loaded what Russia wanted to load.
Thank you very much. Baroness Primarolo wanted to come back on the data adequacy issue.
Could I thank you very much. It's been very informative and helpful evidence session. But just a quick question back on the data adequacy loop. You've been very positive indeed about maintaining through all the databases our access, Steve, and the data adequacy has still to be decided. We've got up to 6 months where we're running under the same rules. But as a third country, the hurdle's is higher to get that adequacy. Could you confirm that if for any reason we didn't have data adequacy, or we were required to bring in additional arrangements, you're still confident that we would maintain access to all these databases, or do the two move together?
Thank you. I suspect that's a complex area of both technical expertise and law that I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be able to give you a very detailed answer on. I don't wish to prevaricate at all. It would lead us to require the EU member states to agree that we have appropriate safeguards in place. Now, whether I think that's really all I can say. Now, I wouldn't want to judge or predict how likely that is or it isn't, and whether that would automatically lead to an inability to use the tools that we've spoken about so positively. So perhaps it might be more appropriate if I could write to the committee in slightly fuller and more expert terms than I'm able to answer that now. Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be fine. It is actually the Commission's competency this is dealt with. It doesn't go to member states. It's a technical issue. But I think it would be very helpful if you could perhaps give us a fuller answer on the interaction between the separate decisions and the overarching impact of data adequacy on that. Thank you.
Chairman, may I go?
Lord Anderson, yes, please.
The question of the exchange of criminal records, I was thinking of putting myself in the position of a judge or magistrate with a foreign national before me who has just been arrested, and I ask, what are his criminal antecedents? Now that has been extended, the possibility of exchange up to 20 days. Will that make it possible for someone to be put in custody or indeed released when he should not have been released or not put in custody for bail?
So, as I say, I'm not anticipating any change to current situation. So, overseas conviction data has never really been available for those sort of decisions in the custody suite. I understand they are used sometimes by courts. So, clearly, any significant delay in obtaining that information may, on occasions, mean the court's not available to, or doesn't have it available to take account of. but I couldn't say any more than that, I'm afraid.
There is a danger of injustice if the relevant information is not available in respect of bail, which can be an immediate, if a person is brought immediately before a judge or before a magistrate.
Yeah, but that has never been, that material's never been available. So I don't think we're seeing a change in that position.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I think on behalf of all of us, we found that a really interesting session to get behind the words on the page and understand the operational implications of them. As Lord Polak says, I think a number of the points that have been made, are more encouraging than perhaps we had understood by simply reading the words on the page. That is extremely useful to our inquiry. On a number of points, you've kindly said you might write to us with a bit of further detail, which we would welcome as well, because we want to get our report as full and detailed and accurate as possible. But on behalf of the whole committee, I thank all three of you very warmly for your time this morning and for what you've contributed to our inquiry. And with that, I bring the meeting to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.